The office door opened, and a man stepped inside carrying nothing but a worn leather folder. "Good morning," he said with a polite smile, extending his hand. "I'm Malcolm Brooks. I'm here for our 11 o'clock meeting." Rebecca barely looked up from her desk. Then her eyes drifted from his old shoes to his plain jacket, and she frowned. "I think you're in the wrong office," she said. Malcolm kept his hand out. "No, ma'am, I'm your 11 o'clock. Rebecca let out a laugh. She looked at his outstretched hand with disgust, then she used the tip of her pen to nudge his hand away, refusing to touch it herself. "No, my 11 o'clock doesn't look like you." She pressed the intercom. "Security? There's been a misunderstanding. Could someone escort this man out? He clearly doesn't belong here." The room fell silent. Malcolm slowly lowered his hand, nodded once, and turned toward the door. Rebecca smiled, convinced she had just thrown out another nobody who had found himself in the wrong place. She had no idea she had just humiliated the only man who could save her billion-dollar company merger. Her worst career nightmare was only beginning. The street outside Horizon Biotech was already loud by 8 in the morning. News vans lined the curb. Cameras pointed at the glass doors. Reporters checked their microphones and practiced their lines because everyone believed the same thing. Today was the day Horizon Biotech would announce the biggest merger in the company's history. Inside the building, the mood was even louder. Employees hugged in the hallways. Someone had already brought in champagne, hiding it in a supply closet for later. A young lab assistant printed out a news article about the merger and taped it to her cubicle wall, like a trophy. For 3 years, this deal had been the only thing that mattered. Billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, research programs that were dying for funding, suddenly saved. And at the center of it all was Rebecca Holloway. She stood at the window of her top-floor office, looking down at the cameras like a general looking down at a battlefield she had already won. Rebecca built Horizon from nothing. A small lab, a handful of employees, years of nobody believing in her. Now she ran a company worth billions, and in a few days, the whole world would know her name. She smoothed her jacket and smiled at her own reflection in the glass. This was supposed to be the best week of her life. She had no idea it was about to become the worst mistake she would ever make. At exactly 9 o'clock, her assistant, Olivia Chen, stepped into the office holding a folder. "Your 9 o'clock is here," Olivia said. Rebecca didn't even turn around. "Which one?" "The compliance review. The federal one." Rebecca waved a hand in the air like she was swatting away a fly. "Fine, send him in. 5 minutes, tops." She wasn't worried. Why would she be? Every investor had signed, every executive had signed, the board had signed. This was the last box to check before the merger became official. A formality, paperwork, nothing more. She had no idea that this appointment was the only thing standing between her and total disaster. The door opened, and a man walked in. He wasn't what anyone expected. No expensive suit, no shiny watch, no assistant trailing behind him carrying his bags. Just a plain navy jacket, a pair of ordinary shoes, and a single worn leather folder tucked under one arm. He looked more like a man delivering mail than a man who could shut down a billion-dollar deal. Rebecca barely looked up from her desk. "I'm Malcolm Brooks," the man said, his voice calm and steady. "We have a scheduled review." Rebecca studied him for exactly 2 seconds. The plain jacket, the old folder, the quiet way he stood, like he wasn't in a hurry to impress anyone. She made up her mind instantly. Junior staff. Sent in early. Probably nervous. Not important. She let out a short laugh, the kind of laugh that makes a room go quiet. "You people always think an appointment means you're important," she said. A few executives near the door heard it. Nobody said a word. Malcolm didn't flinch. He reached out his hand to introduce himself properly. Rebecca didn't take it. She turned back to her screen instead, already done with the conversation. "I'm afraid there's been some confusion," Malcolm said, still calm. "This meeting was confirmed 3 months ago. I'm here to begin the final federal review before your merger receives clearance." Something about the word clearance should have caught her attention. It didn't. It didn't. Rebecca was too busy thinking about cameras outside, about champagne in a supply closet, about her name in tomorrow's headlines. Malcolm didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand to speak to someone higher up. He didn't threaten to make a phone call that would ruin her day. He simply nodded once, picked up his worn folder, and turned toward the door. But before he left, he stopped. Just for a moment, he looked back at Rebecca, who still hadn't bothered to look up from her desk. "I hope, for everyone's sake," Malcolm said quietly, "this isn't the decision you regret most." Nobody in the room understood what that meant yet. Rebecca certainly didn't. She barely heard it. She was already dialing a number, already thinking about the press conference, already 3 steps ahead in her mind toward a future that felt guaranteed. Malcolm walked out. The doors closed behind him. And just like that, the man who was quietly escorted out of the building disappeared into the elevator, carrying with him the one thing Rebecca needed more than anything else in the world. She just didn't know it yet. Olivia stood frozen near the door for a long moment after he left. "Rebecca?" she said carefully. "Who exactly was that?" Rebecca finally looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Some compliance guy. Why? Did you check his credentials?" "I don't need to check credentials for someone in a folder and sneakers, Olivia." Olivia opened her mouth again, then closed it. She would find out soon enough. They all would. Rebecca turned back to her window, back to the cameras waiting outside, back to the celebration already building in the hallways below. She had no idea that somewhere in that elevator, riding down floor by floor, was the one man on Earth who could still stop everything she had spent her entire life building. The one man whose one signature, decided whether the merger lived or died. And she had just thrown him out over a joke about sneakers. Downstairs, employees were still celebrating. Someone popped a bottle of sparkling water, pretending it was champagne, laughing about how close they were to the finish line. None of them noticed the man in the navy jacket, walking quietly through the lobby, past the security desk, out through the front doors, and into the crowd of reporters who didn't even glance at him. Nobody recognized him. Nobody knew his name. But somewhere inside Horizon Biotech, a countdown had already begun. And Rebecca Holloway, standing at her window, with a smile still on her face, had no idea that the biggest week of her career was about to become the moment everything started falling apart. The only question left was simple. Who exactly did she just throw out of her building? If you've ever been underestimated by someone because of how you looked, this story is for you. Welcome back to the channel. Before we continue, if you're enjoying the story, hit that subscribe button, because you're about to see how one arrogant decision destroyed everything Rebecca spent her life building. 1 hour. That's all it took for Rebecca Holloway's world to start cracking. She was still at her desk, going through emails, still smiling every time she thought about the press conference coming up. The champagne was probably warm by now, hidden in that supply closet. She didn't care. She'd buy better champagne once the merger was official. Then her office door burst open. Olivia didn't knock. She never did that. Not once in 5 years working together. Rebecca looked up, already annoyed. What now? Olivia's face told her this wasn't about scheduling. She was holding a thick folder, gripping it so tight her knuckles had gone pale. Her breathing was fast, like she had run up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. "Do you know who you just had removed from this building?" Olivia asked. Rebecca shrugged, going back to her screen. "Some compliance guy. Junior, I think. Why does it matter?" "He's not Junior." Something in Olivia's voice made Rebecca finally stop typing. Olivia walked forward and dropped the folder on the desk. It landed with a heavy thud, papers sliding slightly out of place. "Read it," Olivia said. "All of it." Rebecca opened the folder slowly, still convinced this was some kind of overreaction. The first page had a photo. The same man from earlier, navy jacket, plain shoes, worn folder under his arm. But under the photo were words that made her stomach drop. Malcolm Brooks, Senior Director, Federal Compliance Review. Rebecca blinked, reading it again, like the words might change if she looked hard enough. She kept reading. Malcolm wasn't just some government employee filling out forms. He led an independent team that reviewed every major merger in the country before it could receive final approval. Companies didn't get to pick who reviewed them. The government sent whoever they trusted most. And apparently, they trusted Malcolm Brooks more than anyone else. "This can't be right," Rebecca said quietly, more to herself than to Olivia. It's right, Olivia said. I tried to warn you 3 times this week to personally meet with him before today. You kept pushing it off. You thought he'd wait, Olivia cut in. You thought everyone waits for you. Rebecca didn't answer. Because that was exactly what she thought. She flipped to the next page, and her hands started to feel cold. There it was, in plain black text. Malcolm Brooks's signature. His final recommendation was the last requirement before the federal agency would grant clearance for the merger. Not the board's approval, not the investors, not the acquiring company. One report, one signature, one man. And Rebecca had just thrown him out of her building over a joke about sneakers. Without his signed report, Olivia said slowly, like she was trying to make sure it actually sank in, the merger cannot move forward. Legally. At all. Rebecca stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Get him back here, she said. Now. I already tried. Try harder. Olivia's jaw tightened. Rebecca, you can't just call someone like him and expect. I don't care what I can and can't do, Rebecca snapped. Call him. Rebecca grabbed her own phone, scrolling through emails until she found the number listed for Malcolm's office. She dialed. It rang once, twice. Then a recorded voice picked up. You've reached Malcolm Brooks. I'm currently unavailable. She hung up and dialed again immediately, racked as if calling faster would somehow change the outcome. Same voicemail. She tried a third time. Same voicemail. She sent an email, typing quickly, deleting words, retyping them, trying to sound calm even though her hands were shaking. Mr. Brooks, I believe there was a misunderstanding this morning. I'd like to reschedule at your earliest convenience. She hit send and stared at the screen, waiting for a reply that didn't come. Minutes passed. Nothing. She refreshed her inbox. Nothing. She tried calling his office directly this time, hoping to speak to someone else on his team. A polite voice answered. Federal Compliance Review. How can I help you? This is Rebecca Holloway, CEO of Horizon Biotech. I need to speak with Malcolm Brooks immediately. There was a short pause on the other end. The kind of pause that told her the person already knew exactly who she was and exactly what had happened that morning. I'll pass along your message, the voice said, carefully neutral. Mr. Brooks will reach out when he's available. The line went dead. Rebecca stood there, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to silence. For the first time in years, Rebecca Holloway felt something she wasn't used to feeling. Powerless. She built this company from a small lab with 3 employees. She had negotiated with billionaires. She had walked into rooms full of powerful men and made them listen to her. She always found a way to win. But right now, there was no email to send, no meeting to schedule, no amount of money that could fix what she had just done. She had insulted the one man whose approval decided the future of everyone in this building. More than 4,000 employees. Research programs that depended on this funding. Years of work. All of it now sitting in the hands of a man she had refused to shake hands with less than 2 hours ago. Olivia watched her carefully, arms crossed. There's something else, Olivia said quietly. Rebecca looked up, almost afraid to ask. What? Malcolm didn't come here just to sign paperwork. Rebecca's stomach turned again. What do you mean? Olivia hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. I made some calls while you were trying to reach him, she said. His visit wasn't a routine formality. His team requested access to internal financial records last month, quietly, before any of us even knew he was coming. Rebecca felt the floor shift under her feet. Financial records? Why would he need? I don't know the details yet, Olivia admitted, but people like Malcolm Brooks don't request internal financial access unless they already suspect something is wrong. Rebecca sat back down slowly, her earlier confidence completely gone. Wrong with what? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. Olivia shook her head. I don't know, but whatever it is, he already knew about it before he ever walked into this building. Rebecca stared at the folder on her desk, at Malcolm's photo staring back up at her. Calm, steady, unbothered. She thought about the way he had looked at her before leaving. That quiet, almost gentle warning. I hope, for everyone's sake, this isn't the decision you regret most. She hadn't understood it then. She was starting to understand it now. Rebecca had spent her entire career believing that success meant never having to explain yourself to anyone. She was the one people waited for. She was the one who made the final call. But sitting in her office, staring at a folder she should have read 3 months ago, she realized something for the first time. She wasn't in control anymore. And somewhere out there, a quiet man in a plain navy jacket held the future of her entire company in his hands. Along with something else, something Rebecca didn't even know was hiding inside her own walls. Olivia broke the silence. "Rebecca," she said carefully, "what if this isn't just about the merger?" Rebecca looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. What else could it be about? Neither of them had an answer. But somewhere inside Horizon Biotech, hidden behind years of financial reports and quiet approvals, something was waiting to be found. And Malcolm Brooks already knew exactly where to look. Malcolm Brooks never came back to shout. He never came back to threaten anyone. He didn't need to. 3 days after he walked out of Rebecca's office, his team was already inside Horizon Biotech, moving quietly through the building like they belonged there. Federal investigators, dressed in plain clothes, sitting in small conference rooms, asking employees simple questions. How long have you worked here? Who approves your department's spending? Have you ever noticed anything unusual with vendor payments? Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just quiet questions, one employee at a time. But inside those quiet rooms, something was building, something Rebecca didn't understand yet. She stood by her office window, watching people walk in and out of those conference rooms all day, and she was certain of one thing. This was punishment. He's doing this because of what happened, she told Olivia. This is retaliation, plain and simple. Olivia didn't answer right away. She had learned, over the last few days, that pointing out the truth too fast only made Rebecca angrier. "Rebecca," she finally said, "men like Malcolm Brooks don't waste federal resources on revenge." "Then explain this," Rebecca snapped, gesturing toward the conference rooms. "Explain why he's tearing my company apart just days after I asked him to leave." Olivia didn't have an answer yet, but someone else in the building did. Daniel Price sat alone in his office, staring at a spreadsheet he had looked at 100 times before. Daniel wasn't the type of person anyone noticed in a hallway. Quiet, careful, the kind of employee who showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for credit. He was also the only person at Horizon who had noticed something wrong almost a year ago. Small transfers, strange vendor names, payments that didn't quite make sense once he looked closely enough. He tried raising the issue months earlier. He brought it to his supervisor first, then to another executive. Every time the answer was the same. The numbers balance. Don't worry about it. But numbers balancing on paper and numbers being honest were two very different things. Daniel knew that. Nobody else seemed to care. What nobody in the building knew, not even Rebecca, was that Malcolm's team had already been quietly speaking with Daniel for months. Long before the merger review. Long before anyone walked into Horizon's headquarters. Daniel had been carrying this secret alone for a long time. Today, that was about to change. A young investigator knocked softly on his office door. "Mr. Price, do you have a few minutes?" Daniel's hands went cold, but he nodded. He closed his laptop, took a breath, and followed her into one of the small conference rooms. Inside, another investigator was already waiting, along with a folder Daniel recognized immediately. It was filled with the same suspicious transfers he had tried to report over a year ago. "We understand you raised concerns about certain vendor payments," the investigator said gently. Multiple times, Daniel swallowed hard. Nobody listened. "We did," she said. "We just needed the full picture first." For the first time in over a year, Daniel felt something close to relief. He opened up completely. Every transfer, every suspicious vendor, every time he had been dismissed, every warning sign nobody wanted to hear. By the end of the conversation, investigators had exactly what they needed. Nearly $38 million had quietly moved through shell companies disguised as research contractors. Money that should have funded real medical research had instead disappeared into accounts nobody could easily trace. Someone inside Horizon Biotech had been stealing for years. And Daniel Price had just handed investigators everything they needed to prove it. Word moved fast once investigators started pulling financial records. Victor Langford heard about it before most executives did. Victor was the chief financial officer. Charismatic, confident, the kind of man everyone in the building trusted without question. He had helped Rebecca build Horizon from the very beginning. He sat in every major meeting. He signed off on every major deal. He was also the man who had been quietly siphoning money out of the company for nearly 4 years. When Victor heard investigators were reviewing vendor contracts, his easy confidence disappeared in an instant. He locked his office door. He deleted files he should have deleted years ago. His hands shook as he typed, deleting emails, shredding old paper records he had foolishly kept as backup. But deleting evidence after federal investigators already had copies wasn't protection, it was panic. And panic makes people careless. That evening, Daniel Price left the building later than usual. His phone buzzed as he walked toward the parking garage. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then something told him to answer. Daniel Price? The voice on the other end was calm. Too calm. Who is this? You should think very carefully about what you told investigators today, the voice said. People who talk too much sometimes lose everything they care about. The call ended before Daniel could respond. He stood frozen in the parking garage, his heart pounding. He didn't recognize the voice. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what it meant. The next morning, Daniel didn't show up for work. His desk sat untouched. His laptop remained closed. Coworkers assumed he had called in sick. Malcolm's team knew better. They immediately opened a new line of investigation, this time focused on witness tampering. Someone inside Horizon had crossed a line that turned a financial investigation into something far more serious. When Rebecca heard that Daniel hadn't shown up, panic crept into her voice for the first time. What happened to him? She asked Olivia. Nobody knows yet, Olivia said. But Rebecca, listen to me carefully. This isn't about the merger anymore. This isn't about you. Someone inside this company is dangerous. Rebecca shook her head, still holding on to the only explanation that made sense to her. Malcolm did this, she said. He's trying to destroy everything I built because I embarrassed him. Olivia had heard enough. Malcolm isn't investigating because you insulted him, she said, her voice sharper than usual. He was investigating long before he ever walked into this building. Rebecca opened her mouth to argue, but Olivia kept going. 3 months ago, his office requested financial records. 3 months, Rebecca, before your merger meeting was even confirmed. This was never about you. The words landed like a slap. Rebecca sat down slowly, her earlier certainty crumbling piece by piece. If Malcolm wasn't punishing her, then something far worse was happening inside her own company. Something she had missed. Something Daniel Price had apparently tried to warn people about for over a year. And now Daniel was missing. That night, Rebecca sat alone in her office long after everyone else had gone home. She thought about every time she had brushed off a concern from an employee because she was too busy. Every time she trusted someone simply because they were confident and charming. Every time she assumed the people closest to her could never be the problem. She thought about Victor, sitting calmly beside her in meeting after meeting, nodding along, never once raising a red flag. She thought about Daniel, someone she barely remembered meeting, someone who had apparently tried to warn the company for over a year while everyone looked the other way. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Rebecca wasn't thinking about the merger. She was thinking about a simple, terrifying question. If Malcolm wasn't the threat, then who inside her own company was stealing millions of dollars, threatening employees, and hiding in plain sight the entire time? Rebecca didn't have an answer, but somewhere inside Horizon Biotech, someone did. And that person was becoming more dangerous with every passing hour. If you're enjoying the story and you're rooting for the truth to come out, hit that like button. Comment "Justice for Daniel" if you think he deserved to be heard. And subscribe, because the real consequences are just getting started. Daniel Price was found 2 days later. He was safe. Shaken, but safe. He had driven to his sister's house out of state, too scared to answer his phone, too scared to come back to work. When federal agents finally reached him, he broke down in relief. I didn't know who to trust, he told them. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd leave me alone. He was wrong. But his silence hadn't stopped the investigation. It had only confirmed what Malcolm's team already suspected. Someone at Horizon Biotech was willing to threaten an employee to protect a secret. And that secret was about to come apart completely. The search warrants came early on a Tuesday morning. Federal agents walked into Horizon Biotech before most employees had even parked their cars. No warning, no press release, just a line of agents moving straight toward the finance department, carrying boxes and evidence bags. Rebecca watched from her office window, her coffee going cold in her hand. She had spent days trying to figure out who could possibly be behind everything. She thought about every executive, every manager, every person she had trusted enough to hand real power. She never once considered the man who had helped her build the company from nothing. Victor Langford's office was one of the first they searched. Victor tried to stay calm as agents opened his filing cabinets, his laptop, his personal safe hidden behind a painting he had bought specifically to hide it. He smiled. He offered to help. He acted like a man with nothing to hide. But his hands were shaking, and everyone in the room noticed. Inside his safe, agents found documents connecting him to 11 shell companies. Fake research contractors that existed only on paper, created solely to receive payments from Horizon Biotech, payments Victor had personally approved for nearly 4 years. Nearly $38 million funneled quietly through fake invoices, fake contracts, and fake signatures. Money that should have gone towards saving lives had instead built Victor a second home, a private boat, and offshore accounts nobody at Horizon ever knew existed. When agents asked him to step away from his desk, Victor finally stopped smiling. "This is a misunderstanding," he said quietly. Nobody in the room believed him. By that afternoon, Victor Langford was arrested outside Horizon Biotech, in full view of the same reporters who had once waited outside to celebrate the merger. Cameras captured every second. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. The same charismatic man who once stood beside Rebecca in boardrooms, nodding along, offering confident advice, was now being placed into the back of a federal vehicle. While reporters shouted questions, he refused to answer. The story exploded across every news channel within hours. Horizon Biotech's CFO arrested in massive embezzlement scheme. Rebecca watched it happen from her office window, completely speechless. For a brief moment, she felt something close to relief. Victor was the problem. Victor was the thief. Surely now everything could go back to normal. She had no idea her own reckoning was only beginning. 3 days later, Rebecca was called into an emergency board meeting. She walked in expecting relief, expecting congratulations for helping uncover the fraud, expecting to hear that Horizon could finally move forward. Instead, she found a room full of serious faces and a long table covered in documents she had never seen before. The chairman of the board didn't waste time with small talk. "Rebecca," he said, "you are not being charged with any crime. You never stole a single dollar from this company. Everyone in this room understands that." Rebecca felt a small wave of relief. Then he continued, "But we've spent the last 3 days reviewing testimony, and what we found troubles us deeply." He nodded toward the door, and Marcus Reed walked in, standing quietly near the back of the room. Marcus had been asked to testify about company culture, about how leadership operated, about anything unusual he had witnessed over the years. He hadn't wanted to say anything that could hurt Rebecca. But when asked directly, he couldn't lie either. "Rebecca often asked me to remove people from meetings," Marcus said quietly. "Assistants, interns, sometimes senior employees who weren't dressed a certain way or didn't seem important enough to be in the room." The board members exchanged glances. "She rarely let people finish speaking before deciding they weren't worth listening to," Marcus continued. "I followed her instructions every time, but it never sat right with me." Rebecca felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. She wanted to argue, to explain herself, to say it wasn't as simple as Marcus made it sound. But deep down she knew every word was true. Next, Daniel Price was called in. He looked exhausted, still recovering from the threats that had forced him into hiding, but his voice was steady as he spoke. "I tried to report the missing money more than once," he said. "First to my supervisor, then to another executive. I even tried scheduling a meeting with Rebecca directly." "And what happened?" the chairman asked. "I was told the numbers balanced. I was told not to worry about it. Nobody ever asked me to explain further." Rebecca sat frozen, trying to remember if she had ever actually seen Daniel's name on her calendar. She couldn't remember, and that was exactly the problem. Finally, Olivia was asked to speak. This was the hardest part for Rebecca. Olivia had been her closest advisor for years. If anyone in that room understood her intentions, it was Olivia. But Olivia didn't hold back. I warned Rebecca 3 separate times to personally meet with Malcolm Brooks before his review. Olivia said, I told her how important that meeting was. She kept postponing it because she believed government officials simply enjoyed making companies wait. The chairman turned back to Rebecca. Is that true? Rebecca swallowed hard. Yes. The room went quiet. The chairman closed the folder in front of him and looked directly at Rebecca. You didn't steal from this company, he said, but your leadership created an environment where warnings were ignored, honest employees were dismissed, and confident people were trusted more than truthful ones. Victor Langford didn't succeed because he was clever. He succeeded because nobody around him was willing to challenge him, and the one person capable of stopping him early was pushed out the door. Rebecca opened her mouth, but no words came out. The board has made its decision, the chairman continued. Effective immediately, you are being removed as Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Biotech. The words hit harder than anything Victor's arrest, Daniel's disappearance, or Malcolm's warning ever had. Olivia Chen will serve as interim CEO while we begin the process of restoring trust with regulators, employees, and the public. Rebecca looked across the table at Olivia, who wasn't smiling, who didn't look victorious in any way. She simply looked tired and a little sad. Rebecca walked out of that boardroom alone, no assistants rushing to her side, no cameras waiting to celebrate her. Just an empty hallway and the quiet sound of her own footsteps. She thought about every meeting she had ever walked into, feeling untouchable. Every person she had dismissed without a second thought. Every warning she had brushed aside because she was too busy, too important, too certain she was right. She thought about Malcolm's quiet warning on that very first morning. I hope, for everyone's sake, this isn't the decision you regret most. She understood now. It was never really about the merger. It was about every small decision that led her here. Every time she chose to stop listening. Every time she assumed the people beneath her weren't worth her attention. Leadership hadn't collapsed in one dramatic moment. It had been eroded slowly, one dismissed warning at a time, until there was nothing left holding it together. For the first time in her life, Rebecca Holloway had absolutely no idea what came next. 6 months later, Rebecca Holloway looked like a completely different person. No tailored suits, no assistants trailing behind her, no cameras waiting outside a building that used to belong to her. She lived quietly now, in a small apartment across the city, far from the glass office that once had her name on the door. Most mornings, she made her own coffee. Most nights, she sat alone with her thoughts, replaying moments she used to be too busy to notice. She hadn't given a single interview since the day she left Horizon Biotech. Reporters called constantly during the first few weeks. They wanted her side of the story. They wanted her to blame Victor, blame Malcolm, blame anyone but herself. She never picked up, because deep down, she knew the truth. Nobody forced her to dismiss Daniel's warnings. Nobody forced her to postpone meeting Malcolm 3 separate times. Nobody forced her to look at people and instantly decide whether they mattered. She had done that all on her own. Instead of interviews, Rebecca started showing up somewhere else entirely. A small community center, twice a week, where a local leadership program taught young entrepreneurs how to build companies the right way. Nobody there knew who she used to be, not until she stood in front of them for the first time. My name is Rebecca Holloway, she told a room full of nervous, hopeful young business owners. You might have heard of me. If you have, you probably know I lost a company I spent 20 years building. The room went quiet. I want to tell you exactly how that happened, she said. Not because I want sympathy, but because I don't want any of you to make the same mistake. She told them everything. The morning she embarrassed a government official because he wasn't wearing an expensive suit. The employee who tried to warn her about missing money and how she never even remembered his name. The advisor who begged her to listen and how she brushed her off every single time. Success doesn't fail all at once, Rebecca told them. It fails slowly, one ignored warning at a time, until one day, there's nothing left to save. She never once mentioned Malcolm's name with anger. She never once made herself the victim. Back at Horizon Biotech, the building looked the same on the outside, but everything inside had changed. Olivia Chen, now serving as permanent CEO, had spent the last 6 months rebuilding the company from the inside out. She created a direct reporting system so employees could raise concerns without fear of being ignored or dismissed. She promoted people Rebecca had once overlooked simply because they didn't dress a certain way or carry themselves with enough confidence. Marcus Reed was promoted to Chief of Staff, a decision that surprised him more than anyone. Olivia told him plainly, "You spent years doing what you were told, even when it cost you something. Now I need someone who will tell me the truth, even when it's hard to hear." Daniel Price, once dismissed and nearly forgotten, was promoted to Senior Director of Financial Integrity. His job now was simple. Make sure nothing like this ever happened again. Slowly, painfully, Horizon Biotech began earning something it had quietly lost without anyone noticing. Trust. Regulators noticed the changes. Federal reviewers who once treated Horizon with deep suspicion started seeing real progress. Transparent reporting, honest leadership, a culture that no longer punished people for speaking up. Months of corrective action, interviews, and reviews finally led to one final decision. Malcolm Brooks agreed to one last meeting, not with Olivia, with Rebecca. Rebecca almost didn't go. Part of her assumed this would be a final lecture, one last reminder of everything she had lost. Part of her wondered if she even deserved to sit across from him again. But she went anyway, because avoiding hard moments was exactly the habit that had destroyed everything in the first place. She arrived at a small government office, nothing like the glass towers she used to work in. Plain walls, simple furniture, a folder sitting neatly on the desk. Malcolm was already there when she walked in, standing calmly, the same way he had stood in her office all those months ago. "Rebecca," he said, nodding once. "Malcolm?" she replied quietly. For a moment, neither of them said anything else. Rebecca expected him to bring up that first morning. The insult, the dismissal, the order to have him escorted out like he didn't matter. He didn't. Instead, he simply slid the folder across the desk toward her. Rebecca opened it slowly. Inside was the final certification, signed, approved, complete. The merger, delayed for months by an investigation nobody at Horizon saw coming, was finally being cleared. More than 4,000 jobs saved. Research programs that had been on the edge of collapse, finally moving forward again. Patients who needed new treatments, no longer waiting on a company that almost fell apart because of one leader's blind trust. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she read the final page. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "Why now? Why me?" Malcolm sat down across from her, his voice as calm as it had been from the very beginning. "I didn't sign this because I forgave you," he said. Rebecca looked up, unsure what to say. "I signed it," Malcolm continued, "because thousands of people shouldn't pay for one leader's failures. The employees at Horizon didn't create this mess. Neither did the patients waiting for treatments that company produces. They deserve a future, regardless of the mistakes made above them." Rebecca nodded slowly, accepting the words without arguing, without defending herself the way she once would have. "You were right," she said quietly. "About all of it." "I know," Malcolm said, not unkindly, just honestly. As Rebecca stood to leave, memories of that very first morning came flooding back. The laugh she gave him, the handshake she refused, the way she had looked right through him like he didn't matter at all. She stopped at the door. Malcolm looked up, waiting. Rebecca turned around, walked back toward him, and extended her hand. This time there was no hesitation, no arrogance, no assumption that she was too important for the gesture. Just an honest attempt to do the one small thing she had refused to do all those months ago. Malcolm looked at her hand for a long moment. Then he reached out and shook it. It wasn't a symbol that the past had disappeared. Victor was still in prison. Daniel still carried the memory of those threatening phone calls. Marcus still remembered every time he had to remove someone from a room, simply because Rebecca decided they didn't matter. None of that went away with one handshake. But it meant something else. Something quieter, but just as important. It meant accountability, when practiced consistently over time, could slowly rebuild what arrogance had destroyed. Rebecca walked out of that office without cameras waiting outside, without reporters shouting questions, without any of the attention she used to crave so badly. Just a quiet street, a fresh start, and the understanding that respect isn't something people are born with. It's something they earn, one honest decision at a time. And sometimes it takes losing absolutely everything to finally understand that. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know your favorite moment in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about choices, consequences, and second chances. I'll see you in the next one.